It must be really interesting inside your head. Yeah, it is. It's really interesting because I can entertain myself very easily because I have a knack for telling stories. I can haul out stories to solve problems.
You've just heard the Queen, Jane Halonen, talking with our Eric Landrum on the Psych Sessions podcast. Jane joined Eric for a conversation about specialized leadership skills in fall of 2023 at STP's annual conference on teaching. As you can imagine, these two good friends have a lot of fun together, and there are a lot of lessons to be learned. We hope you enjoy it on this 195th episode of Psych Sessions, conversations about teaching and stuff. We've all seen the research. Retrieval practice increases student performance. But that doesn't mean that taking quizzes is popular among students. At W.W. Norton, they think assessment can be fun. So if you and your students are tired of those same old multiple choice questions, mix it up with Inquisitive, W.W. Norton's award-winning adaptive assessment. Created by a cognitive psychologist, Inquisitive utilizes gaming principles and interactive question types to engage students with more active than static multiple choice questions. Students wager points on each question, utilizing strategies of prediction for metacognitive monitoring. With the ability to control their grade by how many questions they answer, almost all students continue working until they have earned a grade they're satisfied with, thus rewarding effort and fostering a growth mindset. Want to see what your students think of Inquisitive? For Psych Sessions listeners new to Inquisitive, you can try it for free the next time you teach. Just go to siegel.wwnorton.com/psych sessions. That's Siegel, like the bird, SEAGULL.wwnorton.com/psych sessions. And the folks at W.W. Norton will even integrate it into your LMS for you. The Psych Sessions podcast is sponsored by STP. That is the Society for the Teaching of Psychology. That's APA Division 2. You can find them at teachpsych.org. The views or product endorsements expressed do not represent the views, support, or endorsements of STP. Psych Sessions is so grateful to have STP as a long-term supporter. If you're having trouble keeping your psych students engaged, then Macmillan Learning created Achieve for Psychology just for you. Macmillan Learning knows that student engagement is one of the biggest challenges you are facing, but Achieve for Psychology engages every student because it's about more than just what happens in the classroom. Students need to be engaged before and during and after class. Achieve helps students by offering exclusive digital content created by and for their authors, and a deep video collection with new, in-demand footage, plus all new goal setting and reflection surveys to help students set goals and provide you the means to check in with students. Preview how Achieve engages every student at macmillanlearning.com/psych sessions.
Welcome back to another episode of Psych Sessions. We're here at ACT in October of 2023 in Portland. We're thankful to Lindsay Maslin and all the crew here at STP to provide the space and access. And I am here with a very special recurring guest, maybe the most recurring guest.
I think I'm a frequent flyer.
Yeah, after 9 punches, your 10th sandwich is free here at Subway. Dr. Jane Halonen. Hi, Jane.
Hi, Eric.
It's always time spent with you is time well spent.
Well, I appreciate time I get to spend with you as well.
It's very kind of you to lie like that on the podcast as we start off like this. The last time we talked, and I was thinking about this earlier today, was in Ann Arbor, Michigan. The last time we talked on the podcast.
Yes.
The last time we talked was about 6 minutes ago. The last time we talked on the podcast was in Ann Arbor, Michigan, in a little room off to the side in a bed and breakfast as we were attending the Bill McKeachie Memorial. That was the last time we talked.
It was a very special trip for both of us.
It was. And we've recorded a couple other things here at ACT in 2023, but I wanted to talk to you, I don't know, half hour or so, whatever it takes. I've known you, I don't know when I got to know you, but I first encountered you. How about that as the verb? 1988 at MPA at the Palmer House in Chicago, when I started attending CTUP programming.
Council of Teachers of Undergraduate Psychology, an organization that is now defunct.
Yeah, an organization of which you were president of, and believe it or not, I was president of probably 10 years after you were. And here's what I've observed. And for our listening audience, I've not, this is not going to be a hijack of Jane. She knows where I'm going. This is not like a surprise to her. So, that would be rude. Jane, I've worked with you. I've worked with you on a number of different initiatives, whether it was IPI, Guidelines 2.0. There's been a couple others where we met in D.C., other things around different parts of the country, APA SNAP, different things here and there, where you've been the leader or an active participant. And here's my premise. I have a thesis.
Okay.
Here's my thesis. That Jane Halonen has a very specific and rare skill set that is a subset of a leadership skill set. So if you think about leadership and all the traits, qualities, and characteristics, knowledge, skills, and abilities, KSAs, there's a subset that I believe you possess called, I don't have a good word for this. I'm sorry. I should have been more prepared. I did need notes. Called managing big frickin' projects of a national nature that are intricate and complicated and involve synthesis and analysis of people and diverse perspectives, historical precedents, political small p, navigational tasks. Have I convoluted that enough for you?
No, it's complicated, but yeah, I think you're onto something.
And I don't think everybody has that skill set who's a leader in other parts of their life. And I've just been on a couple other things where other people were leaders and it didn't go as smoothly as the times I've seen you do it and the times I've been on processes where you've led it.
Yeah.
Is that the end of the podcast? Did I take up all our time?
Well, I'll say thank you.
Well, can you speak to that? I mean, do first off, whether or not you believe you have it or not, I believe it, so that it's my belief, not necessarily yours. But do you believe that's a specialized skill set, or am I just being fanatical?
I believe it's a set of skills that can be acquired. Do most people acquire the breadth of things that you need if you're put in the roles that I've been lucky enough to be in as managing?
Lucky?
Oops, sorry.
Lucky?
Oh, that slipped out, didn't it? That I've
at the
had,
4-minute 52 mark,
that
it
might
sure
be
did.
a new record. I've had an unusual career in that I do get opportunities dangled in front of me, and I think that comes from having established a reputation pretty early on that I like to untangle things. So I think there's a fundamental problem-solving orientation that I have. And because I listen very carefully to my wonderful mentor, Bill McKeachie, commit fully to whatever it is you're doing and make sure you deliver on your promises. I've always tried to do that. And just as he predicted, when you fulfill your mission early on, if you're a committee member or whatever, and you do things that make things move forward, other opportunities present themselves.
First off, you know how we say behind your back, all hail Jane Halonen.
Well, yes, I'm aware that happens sometimes.
First off, we got to stop here. All hail Bill McKeachie. I mean,
yeah,
absolutely. So I think maybe you've started to operationally define maybe some of the characteristics that I'm trying to hone in on. But maybe it's, I don't know. I'm not being very articulate.
I can help because, when you told me that that's what we were going to talk about after I gave you some business about, are you sure anyone would want to hear this? I really started being more self-reflective. Well, what is it that we're talking about?
Thank you.
I recalled an incident that happened at Advanced Placement that identified one aspect of the skill set, which is I'm a very fast reactor when problems come up. That I don't seem to have the diffusion of responsibility as part of I just don't, part of my makeup. We were out in a break, and one of our readers slipped on some ice and fell. And there must have been 70 people standing around, and I zipped to the kitchen. I didn't go to see her. I just zipped to the kitchen, got an ice bag, filled it up, zipped back, and I reached the ice bag into her just as another person was doing the same thing. And it turned out that the other person ended up being a superintendent of schools. And I thought, I remember looking at the other person, looking in her eyes, and thought, you responded to that in a way that you were trying to reduce problems for that person. And so I think that's maybe part of it, that I'm probably good at being able to predict where things are going to go, and I can head things off.
I think that's very insightful, because earlier today in the same room, we had a conversation about APA Guidelines 3.0. And you've been the leader, the chief organizer of 1.0, 2.0, and 3.0.
Correct. The
creation of 1.0 and then the revisions of 2.0 and 3.0. And I suspect that you had to have a vision about where those processes were going, and you probably knew, all right, let that group go down that side path for a while. Now rope them back in, because you kind of had you knew where they were. If you let them go too far, we're going to get off course. But you got to give them a little slack, otherwise they're going to get uncomfortable with the lane. Is that anywhere near accurate?
Yeah, I think it is accurate. And I think Guidelines 3.0 was an interesting test of the leadership. And by the way, I'm glad you talked me into staying in that role. You were one of the people I consulted.
Okay.
When I was debating, do I want to do this again? I was not sure I wanted to do it again.
You're the natural choice.
Well, that may be because I've proven I can get that project across the finish line twice. But given the high-intensity environment that transpired while we were trying to do 3.0, I do think the experience that I had in the other two and my keen awareness of what we needed to do politically from that experience, I think that was essential to make the process work out as smoothly as it did.
Well, and I don't know when and actually you've talked about, hopefully listeners will listen to the other podcast, but you mentioned, you weren't ever really formally asked.
Not for 3.0.
You were just named, and then it was kind of like, well, someone's got to lead. But from whenever it was kind of assumed or subsumed. It was
assumed, yeah. And actually that was a compliment. It was assumed, but it was a quandary for me, because since there wasn't a formal ask, and I had been debating about maybe it's time for the old gal to step aside so that other people could have a voice in it.
But do you remember the timeline? So did the assumption occur before the pandemic? Did it occur before George Floyd? I'm just thinking you might have committed to some things before other life and world events happened, and all of a sudden leading a task force that you'd led 2 times kind of got multiplicatively or synergistically more complicated.
I believe we knew from the outset that we would be doing this via Zoom. So that means that COVID was underway. And if you add to that, I'm not crazy about Zoom meetings. I learned to do the COVID pivot and teach online, but I don't like it because it doesn't have the same vibrant feeling that a classroom does. And I was a little worried that would happen with this group. But strategically, I think we collectively moved to this is the way we're going to work, since we can't go out and have a lovely dinner to celebrate what we're doing. We're going to make sure that we stick to a very tight timeline. I was pretty good about giving people the agenda ahead of time. I was also good about following up if people were not doing what they were supposed to do. And fortunately, we didn't have much of that. And then I think the power of staying in communication with them at every stage of the game, whether it's the review process or here's what APA says. I would send guardian notes out. I called my group the Guardians of Psychology for the Future. That seemed to be a galvanizing thing. And I think Susan Nolan spoke to that today in our discussion.
She did. And Jane, just even your recap of that makes me think there's something to that. I mean, there's meticulous detail, meticulous attention to detail. Mm-hmm. You know, I was the chair for the last 4 years, and I did some of that. I prepared a meeting agenda, and I had to follow up on things. But I didn't do all that in my leadership role, and my peeps, my people really appreciated me. I mean, and they expressed it. But I didn't have to do all those things in a department chair position that you just described in that national task force leadership position. I think that as I hear that and think about it, I think that's part of this, you know, that leadership. I think you're leveling up in gaming speak. You know, it's a level up or 2 levels up to run a national task force on an important topic and come in and deliver, which you've obviously come to be known for.
Well, I think what has helped that is over the years I've taught social psychology on and off in 3 different settings. And the variation that I teach at UWF, and it's distinctive compared to the way my colleagues teach it, is I teach it as a small group dynamics class applying social psychology. So my students end up in groups. They have to have a group name. This starts out, they think this is pretty stupid. We have kindergarten day. They have to decorate a folder that identifies how I'm going to communicate with them. And all I'm trying to do is build an esprit de corps within the group. And then we use everything that happens in the group to illustrate the principles of social psych. It works like a charm. But the why of that is I say I want you to learn how to manage being in a group so you never have to be in a boring group ever again in your life, which is a pretty good motivation.
Yeah.
I think I apply those skills when I'm working.
And I think the other thing, too, if our listeners don't remember from other interviews or don't know Jane that well, and I learned this when we were doing improv work before the pandemic, is that you have clinical skills training from way back times. And I always appreciate when you bring those to bear. And I remember, obviously you remember it, but I remember it too. And, the way you handle certain situations and interpersonal conflict, you occasionally will remind me, well, Eric, I was a clinician. And so
for a little while. Yeah. 12 years.
Yeah, that's more than a little while. And so, I mean, with the social psych part of you, the clinical psych part of you, the teaching history that you have, I think there's a very unique historical combination of skill sets, knowledge, institutional memory that really comes together.
I would say the clinical part also is informed by the position that everyone is the hero of his or her own narrative. And so I usually assume that people are not trying to be problematic, that there's a good explanation for whatever misbehavior I might be seeing. And so that allows me to approach problem solving in a tentative way. And I once heard, I think Tom McGovern was the person who told me this. He said, Jane, you have an interesting skill in that you can kick people in the ass and they say thank you after. And I think I probably do have that skill, that I think I know how to deliver the news that I need a different level of performance from you without it being a humiliating experience.
What a positive, I know you're a big positive psychology proponent, what a positive way to approach this notion of I can look at someone and I can try to appreciate that they may be going through some stuff, as opposed to the negative attribution.
Yeah.
They didn't get their work done. They're a lousy individual.
They're lazy. They're worthless.
They're lazy. What a mistake to get them on this task force. I'm going to blackball them so they're never on another task force again, as opposed to taking I wonder what's going on in their life. I think that's that's probably a more unusual approach than it should be, quite honestly.
I agree. And I think the value of being a psychological thinker is that if we understand fundamental attribution error, we should all be pausing before we go down the negative attribution path. And then if we remember, we're not the arbiters of truth. We've got our own personal truth, and it may not overlap with the person that we're talking to. So that simply dictates that when you're trying to accomplish a conflict situation, especially, that you do it in a tentative way, that you pay attention to face saving. You're looking to solve the problem as opposed to make somebody feel bad and feel punished.
Right.
Yeah.
I'm reminded of, I've experienced your leadership in a number of things I mentioned a couple minutes ago. I got to work pre-pandemic with Nadine Kaslow, who's been
remarkable
president of APA, and she came in with Psychi for like a day and a half, and she and I'm going to say this in air quotes for our listeners, co-chaired a task force type thing in Chattanooga, and actually at my invitation, and the two of us sat at the head of a table, and there's about 12 people sitting around, and it wasn't a year-long thing like you've done so many times, but it was just a day and a half, and I got to know her a little bit, and it was remarkable just to sit next to her, and she'd be typing on her laptop, and I'd be sitting next to her, and she'd be answering emails, and I'd be kind of running the meeting, and we'd get to a hard spot, and I don't know if Nadine will ever listen to this, probably not, but I'd be a little bit irritated.
Okay.
That, I thought she wasn't paying attention. And she was just like, and she's like the chief psychologist of Grady Memorial, the largest hospital in Atlanta. So she's got a lot going on. But then she'd hear an issue in the room about a discussion point, and she'd just look up from her email and have the instant solution. And she was listening the whole time. She was listening intently the whole time. She just didn't have to be tuned in like I had to, because I didn't have that skill set of multitasking. And she's like one of these rare humans who could multitask.
Yeah, she's an alien then.
Look at her phone, look at her screen, and listen, but not act like she's listening. And it was like, by the end of the second day, it was like, Eric, turn that off in your head. Don't be irritated. She's more engaged in this room than you are. And you're trying. I mean, it showed me that there's these different levels of leadership skills. Mm-hmm. And I can be a department cheerleader, but I wasn't on her level. And with all the love in my heart, I'm not on your level, and I'm not on her level. And so it was just really an interesting epiphany to sit and learn from someone and just watch them work that room without looking like they're working the room.
Well, it's funny that you would produce that example, because that's completely opposite of how I would function in a group.
What a great example of different modalities to get the same job done.
In fact, I might be just a tad draconian, maybe a little badass, in requiring that when people are working on things with me, that you put your damn cell phone away, and I want you to be fully present. And I'm hoping that we'll be in moving quickly enough that you won't feel bored or you're missing something, but that I want your entire attention. Yeah. And I think I make that pretty clear with people.
And I'm probably being overly dramatic. I don't think she was on her cell phone. I mean, it'd have been, and she wasn't looking at a screen the whole time, but she was keeping in touch with doing other things. But when I started analyzing it in my head, she was never out of touch with the conversation in the room. And when she chimed in, it was on point. And she was, I was thinking at 22,000 feet. She was thinking at 35,000 feet. It was just like, wow. Wow. This is pretty cool.
Yeah.
I don't get around people like this very often, except when I go to ACT or when I'm in Chattanooga, Yeah, absolutely. So you think that it's just been acquired over time? I mean,
do.
You weren't, 3 years at Alverno and you weren't doing this.
Actually, I was. Because circumstances were pretty weird. At the first institution of hire was Alverno, and I was chair of the department my second year.
All right. I didn't remember the second year, so I probably wouldn't have picked 3, but okay.
Yeah. And the reason was, at the time, I didn't really realize that it was unusual. I had been a director of a school for children, so
Right.
I had administrative chops. I knew how to get things done and have people come together and know how to celebrate. And, I learned a lot in that job. But I was working in a fairly small department. There were 5 people, and I learned the principle of defensive chair selection, that the person who was chair went on sabbatical, and I looked around at who was left, and I went, I better do that. And so I allowed myself to be drafted over someone with a lot more higher ed experience, and that was the right choice because she didn't have the A gene, she didn't have the administrative gene, and that put me on a pathway administratively there of being the coordinator of the department, then the chair of the division. And at the end of that journey, do I want to rise higher? No, I want a different pond. I want a different pond to play in. So that helped me begin moving.
Okay. So I heard you say earlier today that you weren't going to be the chair of...
Yes, and may I say that again? I will not be chairing Guidelines 4.0.
Okay, and here we're gonna break news on Psych Sessions. I will not be chair of Guidelines 4.0. So we it's an N-2 situation.
Yeah.
So with your immense skill at that 45,000 foot level, what advice would you give to folks who aspire to that very thin air of being at that leadership level with that unique leadership skill set?
It's interesting that you would ask it in terms of what advice would I give, because I truly don't plan on being part of the group next time. It would be time for the old gal to step down. But I have had lots of conversations about how it might look 10 years from now. And that includes thinking about if the tradition holds that we retain some members for continuity purposes out of the group that was assembled. It was a fairly large group. If we keep 1/3 of those people, of those 1/3, I have to look at the task force and go, well, who showed me the most on-point activity? Which folks were the most helpful? Who had the most creative ideas? That I do have some ideas about individuals that whom I think would serve brilliantly in that role. And I might be talking to them in a mentoring way to say, here's what I'm thinking. Now, can I socially engineer that? No. APA is APA, and APA forces who knows but what they could even appoint somebody who's not even an STP type person to do Guidelines 4.0. But I will certainly do all I can to set the structure up so that Guidelines 4.0 will be successful. And I'd be happy to mentor whoever ends up getting it.
Maybe I should ask a different question. How did you get, or do you know any of the process of how you got appointed to chair Guidelines 1.0?
I do. It was the funniest thing ever.
Do you mind sharing?
Yeah, I got a call from Marky Lloyd, who was a wonderful powerhouse in STP. And she said, Jane, I'm calling from the Board of Educational Affairs. And can you tell me who's doing the best work in the area of assessment currently? And so I gave her this list of names. It had Diane Halpern's name on it and Bill Hill and a few of those regulars. Yeah. Mm-hmm. And she said, well, thank you very much. And then I didn't hear from her for a while. And about, I think 2 weeks later, I got a call and she said, Jane, I got them all. And so will you chair them? I thought that was the slickest strategy for trapping somebody into a major piece of work.
Do you know that if she, because interestingly, it'd be cool to know, did she call other people? Because if you gave her the most names, then it really makes sense that you know them. You are the really insider.
Yeah, that's a really good observation. I have no idea what other things she might have done. I mean, she could also have called other people and asked the same kind of questions.
Right. Did she call Bill Hill and say, who are the best people in assessment right now? And if Bill knew 2, but you knew 10, that might mean, hey, Jane is really, really rocking and rolling in assessment. Not only does she know the players, she might be able to lead the players.
I think that was the case. And I'd already had a tryout because my first APA service was on the National High School Standards, the very first effort that was made by APA to dabble in things not doctoral level. And I was one of 2 college consultants, and I got to work with amazing high school teachers. That's where my love for high school people began. And the other consultant was Bill McKeachie. And so here's my hero who's there giving me career advice and meeting all these great people. And so that project worked really well. If I remember correctly, I think my husband designed the logo for that. I mean, we were just really invested in it. And so because that project went so well, I think that's what got me the reputation to get the original question.
That is awesome.
Yeah.
Jane, I don't really have much else to add. Do you have anything else to add? You said you've been thinking about it since I asked you.
Well, I have been thinking about it. I would say the other element that seems to be part of, if this is a winning combination, it is that stuff goes on in my head that's funny.
You mean funny haha or funny weird?
Funny haha. That I have wiring that makes me see the absurdity of everything. And I don't always share what's making me laugh. And the irony here is that you're one of those people who looks at my face and interprets what's going on in my face. So you know something's going on in there. You just don't know what.
Sure.
But I've had people say things like, it must be really interesting inside your head. I said, yeah, it is. It's really interesting because I can entertain myself very easily with the humor connection. And because I have a knack for telling stories, I can haul out stories to solve problems. And I did that routinely as a dean. I did that routinely as a chair. I'm sure I did that as part of Guidelines 3.0, that my repertoire of, do I have a story for that? By God, I do have a story for that. An author once said, stories happen to people who can tell them. And I believe that's true, that I think some people have, I don't know if it's an Irish gift of gab, but I've got it, and I will deploy it when I need to.
I don't know if I know the answer to this. Are you an introvert or an extrovert?
Yes. I'm what I call a bivert.
Have you taken the Myers-Briggs?
I have.
Are you, so you're on the cusp?
I'm Jungian balanced.
I'm sorry, unbalanced or balanced?
Balanced. No, I can do extroverted things, and I draw energy from people. I love to be around people, but I also have to retreat to restore.
And we all do that. I mean, I'm an introvert,
yeah,
but I can flip the switch.
Yeah.
You see me do it all the time.
Mm-hmm.
I mean, in a presentation yesterday, I flipped the switch.
Yes, I'd say so.
But afterwards, I have to power down and be alone and, just leave me the hell alone.
Well, I didn't realize that I had the introverted side as significantly as I did until I was doing the chief reading job that I did for 5 years for advanced placement. That job was it was so hard. And it was just, constant people and constant movement. And at night when everyone was going out and having a great time, it's like, I can't. I got nothing. I got nothing left.
And again, another national leadership role and responsibility. Absolutely. Where you're anticipating. Yeah. Another example.
And I didn't see that one coming. In fact, this sounds so stupid. When they asked me I was surprised they invited me back, because I was causing so much trouble the first year I was a reader. I never told you this story.
I don't know.
The first year I read, I think it was 95, there weren't all that many readers.
Right.
And the question that I was assigned to was just stupid. I mean, it was just a bad question. It was modal 0. And so I pranked people. I mean, I did all kinds of stuff that I was like a bad kid at camp. And when I got my invitation to come back the next year, it said, we'd like to invite you back as a table leader. I actually called Sam Cameron and said, Sam, I think you made a mistake or you weren't watching carefully. And he said, no, Jane, we need to harness whatever you're doing for the good.
Oh.
And I thought that was, I mean, he knew that I had person influence, that I could move and shake things, and very wisely, I think, saw that could be useful as a table leader. And then I table led for a few years, and then when a question leader job opened up, I was asked to do that. For some reason, I didn't see that as a promotion ladder. I didn't see that was going to lead to chief reader. So I think I was a question leader for a couple of years, and then people were saying, well, it'd be great when you're chief reader. So what? I don't did anybody ask me for that? I don't recall that was part of the assumption. And I worried especially about that progression because there was an awful lot of creativity that was needed to make that particular group work in that time when there was more latitude about what we could do.
Right.
So I would stay up all night working on my poem and
your songs, your choreography.
I actually would work all year on the song that I would sing in orientation. All year, making it look like I just came up with it, but I would work like a dog to pull that off.
Red hat.
Yep.
Absolutely.
Yeah.
There's an interesting mini thread here of you getting promoted to leadership positions without formally being invited or not seeing it coming.
Yeah.
Isn't that interesting?
Yeah.
Yeah. Did that happen in your private life? Like, did you become like the president of the homeowners association or,
No, but I think I've had markers about whatever this is in high school. I was voted most likely to succeed in high school.
Were you on the prom court by any chance? No.
No,
okay.
I was not that kind of high schooler.
Okay, most likely to succeed.
Most likely to succeed, editor of the newspaper.
Editor of
the newspaper. Were you part of the drama club?
Were you the drum major for the band?
No, I'm not musical.
Okay.
No.
All right.
No, I think I was in Glee Club, but the Glee Club teacher hated me, so that was not a good experience. Drama club, newspaper, I worked on the yearbook staff, so that helped me develop some graphic skills that I'm grateful for even to this day. But I know that my peers, I did run for class president and lost.
Who the heck beats Jane Halonen?
Rick Overgaard.
Rick?
He was the drum major.
See?
Yeah.
If you'd gone music, you might have won.
If I'd gone music, I might have, yeah. But also this was in an era where women weren't necessarily very successful in competing against men as well. So that was an interesting lesson for me.
Yeah, I know I've asked you this before. What was your maiden name?
Simmons.
You use that as your middle name.
I use it as my middle name now.
Right. So Rick Overgaard versus Jane Simmons.
Rick Overgaard. And I'm pretty sure he took it by a whopping margin.
I guarantee you, whatever Rick Simmons is, Rick Overgaard. Sorry, I'm sorry. I got to edit that part out. Whatever Rick Overgaard is doing, he's not reached the leadership heights that you have.
I have no idea what happened to him, but
we're both going to Google him right after we stop record.
I don't care. But I do know that whatever the skill set is, it emerged early. That people saw I could deliver the goods.
I think that's going to be a subtitle of this, Delivering the Goods. Mm-hmm. Anything else, Jane?
No, I think that's plenty.
That might be a little bit more than plenty.
Might be a lot more than plenty.
Thank you so much for sharing.
My pleasure.
Always time well spent.
I enjoyed it too.
Thanks.